My siblings knew my wife was wealthy. They stayed at my wedding and smiled. They danced. They sprayed money. They called my wife a queen and held her hands and said God had blessed our family. What they did not tell me, what they had known for 4 months before that wedding, was that they had already made a plan for her. Not for her happiness, for her gold. And the morning I finally found out, my wife was sitting in an empty room in a house that used to be full of everything she owned, with nothing left on her wrists, nothing left around her neck, and a look in her eyes that I will never be able to undo. If you think you know where this story is going, I promise you, you do not. My name is Ugochukwu Obasi. I was born the third of 5 children in a compound in Aba, Abia State. We were not a poor family, but we were not comfortable either. My father, Elochukwu, was a retired civil servant whose pension arrived late more months than it arrived on time. My mother, Ngozi, sold fabric from a stall in the main market. The 5 of us grew up understanding that money was something you chased, not something you inherited. That understanding shaped all of us, but it shaped my siblings and I in very different ways. My eldest brother, Nnamdi, became a man who believed the world owed him the comfort he had been denied as a child. He dressed well, he spoke confidently, he made plans that sounded enormous and delivered almost nothing. My second sister, Chisom, was quieter but sharper, the kind of person who observed everything and filed it away. Then there was me. Then Kelechi, the 4th, who had never held a job for more than 8 months. And finally Amara, the youngest, still living at home, still waiting for something to happen to her life. We were not a bad family, I want to say that clearly. There was real love inside our compound. We had shared difficult things. But underneath it all, there was a current that I had learned to pretend was not there. A low, constant hum of competition and quiet resentment, of who got more, of who was favored, of who had escaped and who was left behind. I had noticed it all my life. I had simply chosen not to name it. I met Ephedima at a trade conference in Lagos in 2019. She was presenting on behalf of her family's gemstone and jewelry import business, a company her late father had built over 30 years that now operated across 4 states and had partnerships with suppliers in India and Dubai. She was 31, direct in a way that startled people who expected softness, and she wore a set of gold pieces that were not for show. They were her inheritance. Her father had told her before he died that gold held its value when everything else failed, and she believed him. She wore his belief on her body every day. We dated for 11 months. I introduced her to my family in month 7. I remember that visit with a clarity that now feels like a warning I did not heed. Nnamdi shook her hand and held it a bit too long, looking at the gold bangle on her wrist. Chisom smiled and immediately asked which market the bracelet came from. Kelechi asked openly, without embarrassment, how business was going and whether the family company was publicly listed. Amara just stared. I told myself they were curious. I told myself this was what family did when you brought someone home. I told myself the interest in her jewelry was admiration. Ephedima said nothing that night, but in the car going back, she was quiet in a specific way. Not hurt, quiet in the way of a woman who is categorizing information. I asked her what she thought of them. She said, "They are interesting people, Ugochukwu." That was all she said. I did not push. We married in April 2020, a ceremony that somehow managed to both be beautiful and excessive. Her family came with the full weight of their prosperity. Her mother, her uncles, her cousins who ran the Lagos branch of the business. My family came with hunger, dressed up as celebration. There's no other way I can describe it now. My siblings danced loudly, they wore their best, and they watched everything Ephedima's family brought into that space with eyes that I was too in love to read correctly. Subscribe to Echoes of African's Truth channel if you have not already, because what I'm about to walk you into next is the part of this story that I still cannot fully believe I lived through. Ephedima and I settled in a home in Enugu. She ran the business from a home office 3 days a week and traveled to Lagos and Abuja for the other 2. I was in logistics management, stable enough, but her income was the architecture of our life. She never made me feel small about it. She was the kind of woman who built things without making the person beside her feel like a subordinate. Our home was full, not just of her gold, which she kept in a locked cabinet in our bedroom, but of warmth and order, and the particular piece of a household where someone competent is in charge. The trouble, when it came, did not announce itself. It started with visits. My siblings began visiting more frequently after the wedding. This was not unusual on the surface. Newly married couples get visitors, but the frequency escalated. Nnamdi started coming every other weekend, always with an excuse. A meeting in Enugu, passing through, checking on us. He would stay 3 or 4 days. He charmed Ephedima, who was gracious to guests. He asked her questions about the business with the enthusiasm of a student, and she answered her because she was generous with her knowledge. He would sit with her after dinner, asking about import logistics, about the gemstone trade, about how her father had built relationships with the Dubai suppliers. He was so convincing in his curiosity that I remember thinking at one point that Nnamdi was finally growing up, that he was showing the ambition he had always claimed to have but never channeled. I remember feeling proud of him. That memory makes me feel like a fool now. Kelechi came too. He had a different approach, more blunter, more desperate. He asked for loans twice in 3 months. Ephedima gave without complaint, but she told me privately, Ugochukwu, the second loan was before he repaid the first. I spoke to Kelechi. He apologized and promised. He said business was slow. He said things would turn around when a particular deal came through. The deal never came through. He did, however, return for a 3rd visit, this time with a story about a birth collector and a family emergency that had me reaching for my own wallet before Ephedima quietly placed her hand over mine and said she would handle it. Amara, our youngest sibling, was the one I least suspected. She was reserved, watchful, the one who had always seemed most like me. But Amara had been recruited. I found this out later. She had been used as a messenger, a soft present sent ahead of Nnamdi's visits to prepare the emotional ground, spending time with Ephedima talking about jewelry and family heirlooms and the cultural meaning of gold, conversations that were entirely genuine in Amara's own mind, but which Chisom had engineered to put Ephedima in a headspace of warmth and openness before the real requests arrived. Amara did not know she was a tool. That is the part that still pains me. It shows how completely Chisom had orchestrated everything. She had assigned roles, managed her own siblings like a project, each given a function, some knowingly, some not. Chisom never asked for money directly. Chisom, I have come to understand, was the architect. She was the one who had started all of this. She was the one who had done the research. Here is what I did not know. 4 months before our wedding, Chisom had traveled to Lagos on the pretense of visiting a friend. While there, she had gone to the area where Ephedima's family business operated. She had spoken to people, suppliers, market traders, anyone who would talk. She had come back with a detailed picture of exactly how wealthy Ephedima's family was. The jewelry business, the properties, the inheritance Ephedima had received when her father died, which included a collection of gold pieces, some antique, some investment grade, that had been valued independently at a figure that made Chisom's hands shake when she wrote it down. She had taken that information to Nnamdi. Together, they had built a plan. A long, patient plan, the kind of plan that could only work if nobody named it out loud, if it moved slowly enough that the person being targeted never saw it as a pattern. The plan was simple in concept. Get close to Ephedima, gain her trust, create situations, financial emergencies, family crises, emotional moments that would cause her to offer help in the form of the gold, not all at once, piece by piece. a gold chain for Chisom's husband's business crisis, a bangle offered as collateral for Kelechi's debt, a pair of earrings suggested as an investment contribution to Nnamdi's newest project, one that would triple in value and return the earrings plus profit. Except, of course, it never would, because the project never existed. What they had calculated on was this: Ephedima was a generous woman, and generous women, when surrounded by people who are patient enough to manufacture need, often give more than they should before they realize what is happening. They were not wrong about her generosity. Where they miscalculated was the other thing she was. Before I tell you what she noticed, I need to tell you about the night everything began to surface for me. It was a Thursday. I had come home early from work and found Nnamdi in our living room with Ephedima, showing him something on his phone. She was leaning forward, engaged. He was animated. I stood in the doorway for a moment. They had not noticed me, and I watched my brother's face, just for that one unguarded second before he looked up and his expression shifted into the warm mask he always wore around her. In that second, his face looked like a man calculating the weight of something. I do not know how else to describe it, but something in me cracked open. I said nothing that evening, but I began to watch. And when I started watching, I started seeing things I had explained the way for months. The way Chisom always complimented a specific piece of Ephedima's jewelry right before something went wrong in her life. The way Kelechi would arrive during moments when Ephedima was in a good mood, emotionally elevated, generous. The timing of Nnamdi's so-called business proposals, always presented after he had spent several days being warm and present and brotherly, building goodwill, like a man laying bricks for a structure he intended to use. I also noticed what was missing: the cabinet in our bedroom where Ephedima kept her gold. I had not opened it in weeks. When I finally did, quietly while she was on a work call, I counted what I could see against what I remembered. There were gaps, small ones, pieces that were there before that were no longer there. I closed the cabinet and sat on the edge of the bed and could not breathe properly for several minutes. That night, I told Ephedima I needed to talk to her. I sat across from her at the kitchen table and I said, "Tell me everything." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "You are ready to hear it now?" She had known. Not from the beginning, but she had figured it out in pieces, the same way she managed everything, methodically, without panic, gathering evidence before drawing a conclusion. She had noticed the timing of Chisom's complaint long before I had. She had tracked the loans to Kelechi in a private ledger and calculated that neither repayment was coming. She had allowed Nnamdi's business proposal to advance far enough that she had a full paper trail of his intentions and a voice recording of the conversation in which he described the investment opportunity she had already confirmed through her own business contacts did not exist. She had said nothing to me because she was waiting. Waiting for what? I asked. She said, waiting to see if you would see it yourself, because the next step depends entirely on which man you are. Stop everything for a second. If you are watching this and you are not subscribed yet, do it now, because what she said next changed the entire shape of this story. She said, "Ugochukwu, I did not lose my gold because your siblings are clever. I let some of it go because I needed them to feel safe. A person who feels safe stops being careful, and I needed them to stop being careful." I stared at her. She opened her laptop and showed me a folder. It contained photographs, voice recordings, WhatsApp conversations she had carefully preserved, bank transfer records, and a signed document from Nnamdi in which he had committed, in writing, in exchange for the earrings, to return them along with a 20% premium within 60 days. That document had his signature and his fingerprint. She had asked him to sign it as a formality, and he laughed and signed it, never imagining it would be used against him. She also showed me messages she had received from a cousin of Chisom's, a woman who had grown a conscience when she heard the full scale of what was being planned and had quietly made contact with Ephedima 3 months prior to warn her. The gold that was missing was not all missing. Some of it had been lent in ways that were now fully documented. Some of it, Ephedima had moved herself quietly to a separate location, replacing the pieces with similar but lower value items that a casual glance would not distinguish from the originals. The real collection was intact. What my siblings had taken were in several cases carefully selected substitutes. She had been running a counter operation inside my own house, and I had not known a single detail of it. I felt multiple things at once. Admiration that was so strong it almost knocked me sideways. Shame because my family had brought this into our home. Grief because nothing about the siblings I grew up with would ever look the same again. And beneath it all, a slow, burning fury that I needed to do something with before it consumed me. Ephedima sat across from me and said, "Before you do anything, I need you to decide what we are protecting. If it is the gold, we have most of it. If it is the family relationship, you need to understand what that relationship actually was worth. And if it is our marriage, then we handle this together and we handle it the right way." We spent 3 hours at that kitchen table. By the end of it, we had a plan. Nnamdi was called first. I invited him to the house, and Ephedima was present. We put the document in front of him, the one with his signature. The 60-day window had expired 11 days earlier. His face went through 5 different expressions in 10 seconds. Confusion, recognition, calculation, false warmth, and finally something that might have been the beginning of shame. He tried to reframe it as a misunderstanding. Ephedima let him finish his sentence and then played the voice recording. He stopped talking. Chisom was harder. Chisom did not break the way Nnamdi did. She went cold and defensive. She said Ephedima was a manipulative woman who had trapped her brother. She said the family had the right to benefit from what Ugochukwu had married into. She said it with a conviction that told me she had been telling herself this story for so long it had become her reality. I looked at my sister across the table and saw a stranger wearing a face I grew up with. What broke Chisom was not the evidence. It was my father. We brought Elochukwu into this, not to punish anyone, but because he was the head of the family and he deserved to know what was happening under his family's name. My father was a quiet man, but he was not a weak one. He drove from Aba to Enugu on a Tuesday morning, and he sat in our living room with his hands on his knees and he listened to everything. We laid it out carefully, not dramatically, not with any excess emotion, just the facts in the order they had happened. The visits, the loans, the manufactured emergencies, the document Nnamdi had signed, the voice recordings, the substituted gold pieces, all of it. My father did not interrupt. He asked no questions. When we finished, the room was very quiet. He looked at the table for a long time. Then he looked at Chisom, who was sitting across from him with her arms folded and her jaw set, still performing defiance that was already crumbling at the edges. And my father said one sentence that I will carry for the rest of my life. He said, "I did not struggle all those years so that my children would become thieves in someone else's house." Chisom cried. It was the first genuine thing I had seen from her in months. Not the controlled, strategic tears she sometimes produced when a situation required softness. Real tears. The kind that come from a place so deep that even the person crying is surprised by them. She put her face in her hands and she wept. And for a moment, she was not the architect of anything. She was just my sister, sitting in front of her father, broken by 11 words. The restitution was handled quietly. Nnamdi returned the earrings and a sum of money that covered the full value of what had been taken in the loans to Kelechi, who had nothing to return but offered his labor instead, working for 4 months helping with logistics for Ephedima's company at no pay, which she accepted not out of punishment, but because she said she would rather give him a skill than take something he did not have. The lower value items that had been taken, the substitutes, which my siblings had not yet realized were not the originals, were disclosed. Ephedima told them to keep them, not as a gift, as a reminder. No police, no court. Ephedima had the leverage for both and chose neither. When I asked her why, she said, "Courts give you verdicts. What I want is different. I want your family to sit with what they did for the rest of their lives without a legal process giving them a chapter to close it in. That was the most frightening thing she ever said. And she was completely right. My father, in the months after, changed. He stopped performing blindness to the dynamics between his children. He had conversations with each of them that I was not present for, but whose effect I could see in how they carried themselves afterward. Nnamdi became quieter. Not humbled exactly, but more careful. The way a man becomes careful when he has been shown his own reflection and did not like what he saw. Kelechi of all of them changed the most visibly. The experience of working in Ephedima's company, doing real work for real outcomes, gave him something that years of drifting had not. A sense of himself as someone capable of building rather than waiting for something to fall into his hands. Kisom remains the complicated one. We talk, but we talk differently now. There is a layer of glass between us that I do not think will ever fully go away. She has never fully apologized. She has come close in moments, a look, a pause, a sentence she starts and does not finish. I have accepted that some things do not resolve into clean endings. That is not weakness. That is just what life inside a real family sometimes looks like. Ephedima and I have been married for 5 years now. The gold cabinet in our bedroom is full. All of it. She shows it to me sometimes, not to prove a point, but because she wants me to see that nothing was ultimately lost, only relocated and then returned. She says her father taught her that gold holds its value when everything else fails. She says she now knows that what he meant was not just the metal. He meant the principle. He meant the kind of person who refuses to be broken by people who should have protected her. Our first daughter was born 2 years after all of this. We named her Chidinma. God is good. Not because we had forgotten what happened, but because we had chosen what to carry forward. Ephedima said the name was a declaration, not just a blessing. It was her way of saying that the story of their family would not be defined by what people tried to take from it, but by what they chose to build in spite of that. I agreed. Chidinma wears a small gold bracelet that Ephedima's mother gave her on the day she was born. I watch my daughter wear it and I think about all the hands that try to reach for what belongs to this family. And then I think about the hands that protected it. There is something I have thought about a great deal since this story settled into its place in my life. My siblings knew my wife was wealthy. They had categorized her, planned around her wealth, treated her value as something to extract rather than to honor. And what they had failed to understand, what greed always fails to understand, is that the most valuable thing about Ephedima was never the gold. It was the mind that earned it, managed it, protected it, and turned the attempt to take it into a lesson that reshaped an entire family. You cannot steal from a woman like that. You can only reveal yourself to her. You hand her piece by piece everything she needs to know about who you truly are. And women like Ephedima, women who were raised by fathers who taught them that gold holds its value when everything else fails, they receive that knowledge and they hold it carefully, the same way they hold everything else that matters. And she will file that information away, quietly, methodically, and when the time is right, she will place it on the table in front of you with a look that says she has been ready for this conversation for longer than you know. If someone in your life is being underestimated right now, if someone you love is being circled by people who see their resources and not their person, share this story with them, not as a warning, as a reminder of what they are capable of when the moment arrives. Subscribe to Echoes of African Truth. This channel is not just entertainment. They are maps for the moments when life stops making sense, and you need to know that other people have walked through the same dark and found their way to the other side. Stay with us. The next story is already waiting.